how lucky are we to be able to have a codified account of all the bounty mutineers and their descendants? Dr. Bob Kirk has written and published this wonderful book, and we're so fortunate to have him here with us today to tell us some highlights of Pitcairn history. Dr. Kirk is a semi-retired history professor, but he couldn't come yesterday because he was teaching. So much for being semi-retired, Bob. And he's lectured on over 60 cruises. He's visited Pitcairn twice on expedition cruise ships, and he will remind you, as do I, that the expedition ships are the ones that you are most likely to land on Pitcairn, and then it's only for a day, but you are more likely to land if you're on an expedition ship than if you are on a large cruise ship. On the large cruise ships, the Pitcairners come onto the ship to meet and greet you, sell their goods, but on the expedition ships, you will have the opportunity, weather providing, seas providing, to come ashore and actually visit Pitcairn. Bob and his wife Barbara live in Santa Rosa, California, right near here, and we're delighted that he's here to share his knowledge with us.
Thank you, Barbara, and I'm delighted to be here. This is a very exciting event for me because I've been interested in Pitcairn for a long time. My talk is in two parts today. First of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my association with Pitcairn, how I happened to go there. And secondly, I'm going to read you a little bit from my book, Pitcairn Island, the Bounty Mutineers and Their Descendants. And so that's the plan for today. I started collecting stamps when I was 7 years old. And when I still had not come across any Pitcairn stamps for whatever reason. I was collecting the whole world. And this is Dave Stoneberg, my probation, no, he's not my probation officer. He's the fearless editor of the St. Helena Star. Yeah, so that's what he's doing here. When I was in junior high school stamp club, a kid traded me for Pitcairn number 123. And maybe I had a vitamin D deficiency or something, but I just fell in love with the half-penny value with the 3 oranges on it. And I marveled, who is this guy, John Adams? He's certainly not our second president. So I had to find out more about that. And I read Nordhoff and Hall's Pitcairn Island, and then, of course, the other 2 of the trilogy. So I became very, very interested. As a result of collecting stamps, I became interested in history and geography and became a history professor and earned a doctorate eventually. And I'm now semi-retired. I teach at a couple of places over in Sonoma County. So in the mid-1980s, I had an opportunity to go to Yale University for a summer program for college teachers. And the focus was the British Empire under Professor Robin Winks. Well, I had already written a book called You Can Travel Free, which was 103 ways of traveling without paying. And the professor in charge of this said, you know, Bob, I'm going to travel free. And I said, how's that, Robin? He said, I'm going to the South Pacific. I'm going to lecture on a cruise ship. Whoa! I had never heard of that, lecturing on a cruise ship for free. So I said, all I said was one thing. Are you going to Pitcairn Island? He said, yes. Pitcairn Island. I would give my right arm to go to Pitcairn Island. I didn't tell you this was a cocktail party, did I? So I would give my right arm. So about 3 months later, I get a phone call from Lindblad Cruise Line. It's just Bob Kirk, yeah. You and your wife are going on a free 6-week cruise across the South Pacific. And I thought it was a joke. And he said, your friend Professor Winks is sick, and he wants you to take his place. So the South, well, I had gone waiting at Santa Cruz, or what did I know about the Pacific? So, no, I had actually taken a course at Berkeley. So I quickly read 43 books, and And in late January of 1986, off we went, and we got to Pitcairn on February 6, 1987. And that was the great cruise of my life. We flew to Santiago, to the Strait of Magellan, went to Robinson Crusoe Island, to Easter Island, to Pitcairn Island, and on and on and on, until finally we ended up in Port Moresby and flew to Brisbane, petted a kangaroo, and I was back in the classroom on Monday, 6 weeks later. In 1986 dollars, it was $38,000 a couple, which is something on my teacher's salary I wouldn't have really thought of unless I sold the house and the car and mortgaged the kid. So off we went, and we spent the day on Pitcairn, got to know Tom and Betty Christian, talked to Andrew Young, Bernice Christian, Royal Warren, all kinds of wonderful people. And as we went back to our ship, and this is the same experience some of you have had, they rowed out, they came out in their longboats, and they sang in the sweet by and by, and the tears were pouring down my face because we had truly made good friends. Well, that cruise led to 61 more cruises that I lectured on. And whether I'm going to do, how many more I'm going to do, I don't know. But I don't have one lined up right now, but hopefully there'll be one back to the South Pacific. The second time we went was 2004. We went on the Discovery World, and even though the sea was like glass, I could have gone in on an air mattress. The captain wouldn't let us in. But the islanders came out to the ship and talked to us, and I became reacquainted with Tom and Betty and with other islanders that I had remembered from that time. So that was my main experience. Then, for whatever reason, on August the 7th, 2006, I woke up, I sat straight up in bed and said, I'm going to write a history of Pitcairn Island. Why? Because not too many people have been there or have been there twice. I've got a PhD, I know how to write history, and the study center, the great repository of the world, is within 55 minutes of my house. I live in Santa Rosa. So the first thing I did was to take all my lecture notes out of on the computer, put them all in one place, consolidate them so I had my Bly gets wrecked in the Great Barrier Reef and Cook and all this stuff, and the whole history of Pitcairn afterwards. So I had quite extensive notes. Of course, I had to go through and document all that too. And then I started reading hundreds of more books and material, things on the internet, things here in the study center, until finally, eventually, I had a pretty good first draft. And I took it up and I gave it to Herb Ford to read. And Herb was kind enough to read it over. And he said, that's pretty good. And I said, who do you think's going to publish this? And he said, well, he said, Donald Maxton has recently published with McFarland Publishing Company in Jefferson, North Carolina, and they may be interested in publishing your book. So I sent a couple of sample chapters off. One of them was on one of my favorite subjects, Joshua Hill, the dictator, and my chapter, The Mussolini of Pitcairn, and how he took over. That was Nordhofer Hall called him that. I borrowed that. So 3 weeks later, I had a contract on my desk. By golly. So I had to finish the book. So the book took about as long to write and to place as it did for my mother to have me, about 9 months. And the book finally came out in 2008. It's right out here. And I'm not here to sell books particularly. I'm here really because I'm interested in the topic. But I priced it at cost, and it's $55, which is a terrible, terrible price on the on Amazon. But here it's $40, so you'll never get it cheaper if you do want it. And maybe you will want it when I'm all through with you today. So what I'd like to do now, I think I've covered pretty much what I wanted to say, is read you a few things from the book. Not everything that's essential. A couple of things that I think are essential, and some other things which I think are merely pretty fascinating. First of all, not essential, but I think interesting and something for you to think about, I look at the Pitcairn Islanders as celebrities. Pitcairners are famous, except for royalty. There's no other extended family of 3 or 4 dozen individuals, people without remarkable talent, stunning appearance, or notable accomplishment, quite ordinary individuals, present company of Pitcairners accepted, who have been so studiously inspected, so celebrated, so invasively reported by the world's media. Pitcairn Island is a public icon, and its inhabitants are like a royal family in that their celebrity has been determined by heredity. If the name Windsor reflects splendor in Britain, the names Christian and Young reflect romance and daring in the South Seas. They inhabit one of the most isolated spots on Earth. They are descendants of the perpetrators of the most notorious mutiny in all history, that of His Majesty's Armed Vessel Bounty. The blood of mutineers and of sultry Polynesian women surges in their veins. Christians, Youngs, Brown, and Warren families have their community's origin, history, and pedigrees documented in and by a library study center, internet discussion groups, websites, a philatelic research organization, tons of newsprint, detailed genealogical charts, documentary films, and Hollywood extravaganzas. By the end of the 20th century, an estimated 1,200 books, 3,200 magazine articles, and uncounted newspaper articles have been published about the mutiny and the mutineers' descendants. Now, something that you may not have considered. When Bligh came back to London to report the mutiny after he had had his famous 3,611-mile longboat voyage, Bligh told the Admiralty, those guys simply wanted to reconnect with their Polynesian sweethearts back in Tahiti. And so many historians since that time have adopted that stance. I happen to disagree with that. Christian mutinied because he thought his career was ended. And there's a good book called The Wooden World by a man named Rogers. Christian mutinied because he thought his career had ended. In the 18th century, officers depended for advancement on patronage. A man did not join His Majesty's Navy, but in constitutional theory and everyday practice, he was primarily a member of the ship's company, not of the Navy as a whole. It might be said that a man joined an officer, and that officer would pull him up in rank. As the officer advanced, the man would attach his career to that of his superior, his mentor, and the man would pull him up. Take Christian and Bligh, for instance. Christian had certainly sailed with Bligh before. Their families were social friends, and had this breadfruit voyage been successful, Bligh would have been promoted. Well, it wasn't successful, but he was promoted anyway. And then every time he had a mutiny, he was promoted again, which I think probably you already know. When the crew was paid off at the end of an operation, the mariner would sign up in the same ship again. Ideally, the next voyage would be under the same commanding officer. Christian did not cause a mutiny because he was a scoundrel and rascal, as Bligh said, or because his yam allowance was halved. Christian deposed his commander because he had been accused of theft. Bligh's rant effectively, remember, Christian was accused of stealing coconuts from Bligh's pile of coconuts that they had picked up on Numuka in the Tonga Islands. Christian deposed his commander because he'd been accused of theft. Bligh's rant effectively ended Christian's career. As N.A.M. Roger explained in his book, The Wooden World, the worst crimes aboard ship were murder and sodomy, and after that, theft, by far the most serious crime which was at all common. A thief among a ship's company destroyed its mutual bonds of trust and loyalty more swiftly than anything else. Everything Christian had worked for was destroyed and he knew it was within Bligh's power to have him court-martialed. If that were the case, Christian had lost his patron and could look forward to imprisonment and dismissal under the most dishonorable conditions, and conceivably, though improbably, being hanged. So I think that's why Bligh mutinied. If anybody wants to argue that, I'm happy to talk to them later on. But that's what I state. Thirdly, I think that Pitcairn was a perfect hideaway. I've been all over the South Pacific, not so much to Micronesia, but Melanesia, Polynesia. I can't think of a better place for the mutineers to have been. In fact, they were pretty safe for 18 years, and even safe after that. And John Adams was never hanged. This criminal who stole His Majesty's ship got his picture on a British colonial stamp. My gosh, actually more than one. So what could be better? An uninhabited island with fresh water, accessible only with difficulty, only in good weather, mischarted and unvisited by Europeans for 23 years before that time. No indentation on the island warrants even remotely the name harbor. This hazard, well, now they've got some breaks out there, so it's a little bit better. This hazardous opening serves well as a security door to which only the islanders to this day have a key. Pitcairn boatmen know the way in and deliver those visitors only those they wish to welcome. You can think about that. So the mutineers and Polynesian men and women climbed a muddy incline that came to be called the Hill of Difficulty, up the edge where the terrain flattened out somewhat. Exploring farther, they came to the summit of the western ridge of the mountain, with steep inclines and ravines. Christian and his companions saw infinitely more trees than today. And they saw many caves and narrow defiles where it was possible to hide out and defend themselves against His Majesty's Navy were they to be discovered. And of course, as everybody here knows, on January 23rd, 1790, they burned the Bounty so that they wouldn't be caught. Fletcher Christian was fortunate to have found Pitcairn. 2590 miles from Santiago, 4695 from Sydney, 1312 from Tahiti, capable of supporting a community of substantial size. In fact, 233 by 1937. If a British man of war had stopped in the 1790s, however, and its crew come ashore, the history of Pitcairn might have been cut short. Anywhere else that they had gone, ladies and gentlemen, they might have been eaten. They might have died of malaria if they had gone to Melanesia and found some mountainous hideout. They might have been caught very easily. And even though they stopped at Tubuai on their way to back to Tahiti, on their way to Pitcairn, a ship Mercury came by and saw them. So they would surely have been caught anywhere else. So Pitcairn was absolutely perfect. One problem that Pitcairn, I'm going to run a little bit over 10:30 because I was delayed by 10 minutes. Is that all right? Okay. I'm not going to go over 10 minutes. I have got a couple more things to say. Some of the problems that Pitcairners did have was disease because they were so isolated. Even today, they're subject to disease if somebody should land on the island who has some exotic illness that they're not accustomed to. 1842 brought 31 ships. This was the great whaling era. And in January of 1843, George Hunn Nobbs, highly literate school teacher on the island, not an original Pitcairner, but came later, reported fever that begins with a slight shivering, succeeded by violent pain in the loins and head and much febrile heat. What in the world are they going to do about that? They even had to discontinue his school. And in 1844, the surgeon of His Majesty's cutter Basilisk vaccinated 60 islanders, but Nobbs noted, all of our hopes concerning the vaccinations are at an end. It's a complete failure, and almost everybody on the island became sick. So Nobbs, who was really quite well educated for his time, came up with a solution. He said, the influenza outbreaks, he said, I do not think the fever was infectious, and though in the space of 6 days, not less than 60 out of 122 were attacked, I attribute it solely to the peculiar state of the atmosphere. Whenever we have been visited by this epidemic, the circumstances as respects the weather have been invariably the same. A long drought succeeded by 2 or 3 weeks of wet, and then the wind settling in the northwest. In fact, a northwest wind is always a precursor of rheumatism and slight febrile affection. So that's what they knew at the time. There was nothing much they could do about it. The natives of Tikopia in the Solomon Islands came a little bit closer to the truth. They noticed that illness was caused by the whistle of the ship that brought missionaries. Okay. I'm told I have 5 minutes. All right, I want to tell you about something that happened in the early 1980s, which I think is pretty interesting. You may not know about this. And this is about a man named Smiley Radcliffe, who tried to buy Henderson Island. Do you know about it already? Nobody, good. Okay, a few of you do. Okay, let me just read you, this is from the book. In Frog Level, Virginia, lived one A.M. Smiley Radcliffe, a 57-year-old divorced multimillionaire. Smiley had made a fortune in coal mining, and he also owned a motel, shopping center, thousands of head of cattle, and 20,000 acres of the best farmland in Grundy, Virginia. He wanted to trade his lucrative empire for isolation. Radcliffe wanted to separate himself permanently from the evils of communism, Freudian analysis, big government, narcotics, and Elvis Presley. In 1981, Smiley sailed 4,500 miles in a rented schooner looking for the perfect place until he came upon Henderson Island. And he decided, after scaling the cliffs and struggling through the dense undergrowth, he envisioned crops growing, cattle grazing, some decent housing, a jetty down at the beach, and solar electricity. From what I know about Henderson Island, none of that, maybe the solar electricity, would really have been possible. Smiley sailed over to Pitcairn, where he found the islanders to be kind and gentle, almost Christ-like. They're what man was meant to be and once was, he said, because communism, Freudian analysis, big government, narcotics, and Elvis Presley's music were not present on uninhabited Henderson. Smiley offered Britain's Foreign Office $1 million for it, to lease it. Some said $5 million. Pitcairners began to dream about what they would do with Smiley's millions. Title of this is Dreams of Smiley's Millions. But Smiley's millions would never arrive. When the World Wildlife Fund heard about the scheme, they reminded the Foreign Office of its obligation to preserve this incomparable natural habitat of seabirds, coral reefs, and diverse fauna. The British government informed Radcliffe that the island was not for lease. Smiley said, "It's got where you can't do nothing anymore without first checking it out with some idiot." The book that I've written, which you can buy for $55 on Amazon, or you can get out here, takes the history from the Mangaravan Empire and prehistory of Pitcairn up to 2008. And if you read it, I hope you enjoy it. Maybe you get it at the library or whatever. Do I have time for a question?
No, we're not doing questions now. That's what the breaks are for.
Whew. I may not have known the answer. Thank you very much.